Grüß, willkommen in einem Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 17 of my battle series of videos. This video will cover the Austrian army in 1805 during the War of the Third Coalition. The investigation in this video will be focused on the organisation of the Austrian army during this particular war. I'll not be covering any specific battle in detail, nor will I be covering the French troop types or other factors not specifically involving the position and organisation of the various Austrian formations during the war. Obviously, this all resulted in the disastrous Battle of Ulm, so it can be seen as leading up to the Ulm overview type video. While creating general army lists or card-based TONEs for the 1805 campaign, I had real issues with the Austrians. Because the Austrians surrendered a large part of their army at Ulm rather than fight and lose a major battle, it was difficult to find TONEs for the various corps-sized formations. I have to admit there were a couple of smaller battles, such as the Battle of Wertingen and the Battle of Schlachten, but there was no major battle involving the bulk of either side's army. I have to admit, if you are creating a specific scenario for a specific battle, then there's no need to know about the forces which surrendered at Ulm. They never fought a battle, or few of them did. However, if you wanted to investigate the campaign which ended up with the surrender at Ulm, you do not have any single large decisive battle to work with, and you thus, as a result, you needed to know exactly where the positions were at different, or formations were at different times. This campaign actually consisted of a great deal of confusing manoeuvring and a number of smaller battles. On a traditional figure gaming playing area, this is difficult to do, even if the scale is very large. Thus, in order to create a hypothetical 1805 battle, you need to know where the formations were and when, which is the objective of this video. The War of the Third Coalition effectively started on the 9th of August when Austria joined the coalition. At least from an Austrian perspective, this is when the war began. The Austrians decided to make northern Italy the main theatre of operation, with two other armies and a detachment to act as a holding force or a distraction. This shows the position of the Austrian forces on the 25th of September 1805. Let's look at the forces in more detail. The Austrians formed up, or were forming up, into three armies. Let's start off with the army sent to Bavaria, or in Germany, under the command of Ferdinand, who had Mack as his superior. I have to admit I had a lot of issues using the sources to arrive at an idea of the troop numbers at different points in time during this campaign. Nearhorster is, as normal, an excellent source, but spelling differences and gaps in the data made it rather harder to work out what I wished to achieve. This is my best attempt, and I have to admit I'm certain it has a reasonable margin of error. The Austrian forces which advanced into Bavaria in early September were divided into 5 columns, shown here. I was unable to get a structure of the army specifically for the 25th of September. This shows the position of the armies between the 2nd and 25th of September. The main event during this period was the escape of the Bavarian army, which was allied with the French at the time, and the advance of the Austrian army. On the left you can see the French beginning to form up. This shows the position from the 26th of September to the 9th of October. The Austrians consolidated their position, but were attacked in the rear by advanced elements of the French. The real issue for the Austrians were the French managed to get over the main river obstacle, which effectively destroyed their defensive position. By the 3rd of October, the Austrian army was divided into 4 columns, or let's call them corps, of which Wernick's corps was divided into 2 parts. I'm uncertain of the exact structure of each column. In addition, reinforcements were arriving from Austria, and forces from Tyrol were moving north to assist as well. This shows the movements between the 7th of October and the 9th of October. The French had clearly split the bulk of the Austrian army from the Russians and Vienna. Drilling down a bit, this shows the position on the 9th of October, which clearly shows the French breakthrough. That is, over the river in particular. Even if the Austrians wanted to withdraw, it was likely too late at this point. If the Austrians had concentrated everything they had to try and cut off this French advance, they may well have been able to stop the French advance and allow some of the army to escape. But the Austrians didn't do this. The accounts seem to imply Mack was unable to decide what to do, or was unaware of what was happening. Between the 11th and 14th, Napoleon continued to tighten the noose without the Austrians attempting to do anything. Finally, the Austrians attempted to escape, but failed, this being the position on the 14th of October. Drilling down into TO&E, by the 23rd of October I have the structure of one of the columns or corps, but the rest of the army structure is unknown, so I have grouped it into a single corps. It's like this was still divided into a number of different pseudo-corps, but units were being arranged so regularly it was difficult to know what was actually occurring and what the structure of any of the columns or corps were at any particular point in time. The Austrians did not have a true fixed corps structure in place in 1805, and this was a real issue for this particular campaign. The Battle of Ulm effectively ended on the 19th of October, so I suspect some of these forces included forces which actually surrendered. As I do not possess manpower values, this is based on the formations present, and I suspect many were only cadre strength by the end of October. For example, the Austrians lost 20 to 50,000 men by the end of October. Moving down to the next army, or the Second Army, which was based in Tyrol and was under the command of Archduke John, the brother of Charles. This was the smallest army, and after it was realised there was no threat in this sector, that is, the French weren't going to move through Switzerland, it sent reinforcements up north and down south. At the beginning of September, this particular army consisted of 22,000 men. I don't possess any detailed TO&E, unfortunately. On the 8th of October, about 8,000 line infantry were set up north to assist the Austrians in Bavaria. On the 18th of October, the Tyrolean Corps under Hiller was supporting the Austrians in Italy. I'm uncertain if this came from the Tyrolean army that was created in October, or if it was always with the Italian army. The Tyrolean forces here, that is in Italy, totaled 40,000 men, which is a lot more than 22,000 men, but could have included all the forces mobilised in Tyrolia, as well as including non-Tyrolean forces. I suspect this was sent down to Italy at the beginning of the war. Let's focus on what I actually know. The Tyrolean army on the 23rd of October consisted of about 22,000 men, which is a similar strength to the forces of the Tyrolean army at the beginning of September. It's difficult to pin down the actual movement of forces, but I expect elements from this army were sent north and south, but in turn, replacements came as reinforcements, which always ensured the army's strength remained around about 22,000 men. Moving down further south, the final army was the Italian army under Charles, that is the Austrian army in Italy. Initially, this was the largest Austrian force. While Mack was being surrounded up north, in Italy the Austrians engaged in a slow retreat, with the pivotal battle being the Battle of Caldirio on the 30th of October, where the Austrians were defeated. This shows the situation in November and December after the Battle of Caldirio. After the defeat at Caldirio, Charles engaged in a strategic retreat, as with the defeat of Mack, he had to get his forces back to Vienna as quickly as possible. I have to assume his brother and Hillier did so as well. This Russian language map provides a better view, showing how all three forces retreated and joined up into a single army as it moved towards Vienna. Unfortunately, it didn't move as quickly as the French. On the 18th of October, the Army of Italy was divided into three columns or corps, with a garrison force in the rear and further north, Hillier's column or corps. By the 23rd of October, the combined army under Charles theoretically totaled 114,000 men. However, this is derived from the formations that existed at the beginning of the war and assumes no losses, so it was significantly less than this. The actual number almost certainly was less. For example, at least 5,000 men surrendered in a single minor battle prior to the 23rd of October. There were many more examples of this. In conclusion, even if Mack did not get himself surrounded, his forces were simply inadequate to face up to 200,000 French soldiers. Even if he withdrew and joined the Russians, Napoleon would have still had a slight numeric superiority. I suspect it would have been an interesting battle if it occurred, but unfortunately the unwarranted French aggression at the beginning of the war, which was quite foolish, that is the advance into Bavaria before the Russians turned up, and then after that unusual Austrian caution probably meant it would have been very difficult for the Allies or the Austrian Russian forces to attack in any way, shape or form, but they may well have been able to fight a reasonably good defensive battle. However, as we discovered at Austerlitz, the Allies were in no mood to fight a defensive battle. They seemed to like to attack, thinking that they could defeat Napoleon in that sort of mode, and we saw what happened at Austerlitz. Let's now look at the column or corps structure in more detail, starting with the 5 columns of the Army of Germany or Bavaria. The structure seemed unusually uniform, with some minor variation. 2 cavalry regiments and 3 infantry regiments seemed to be the basic structure here. The artillery seemed unusually low. I suspect there was a lot of regimental guns scattered around the infantry, with 2 batteries at a column level. This tended to be distributed among the infantry when in action, which was not an optimal use of artillery. The sources I use were Niehorster, which I'll include a link in the description. This shows the Austrian army in Bavaria, September 1805. On the 8th of October, the Army of Bavaria was organised into 4 columns or corps, with 1 column corps split, making 5 manoeuvre units. I suspect each column corps had at least 2 artillery batteries as well as regimental guns. Instead of concentrating their heavy cavalry, the Austrians scattered these powerful formations around the divisions. The Austrians also scattered their artillery around. This was a suboptimal deployment of their troop types, especially the heavy cavalry. And as for the artillery, while there's nothing wrong with scattering batteries around, they scattered their artillery into as regimental guns, which was not an optimal use of artillery. Once again, my source here was from Niehorster. The Austrian army in Bavaria is shown here, 8th of October 1805. There are other sources, but these lack any core structure details. So let's now look at the Army of Italy. In terms of the Army of Italy, one of the divisions was not with the main army, and as a result I'm not including it. The same applies to the garrison forces. This army was organised into wings rather than pseudo-corps or columns, and 2 of the wings were rather large for even a column or a corps. As with the Army of Germany, a lot of the cavalry were distributed across the infantry or line divisions or infantry divisions. The Niehorster source I used for this was this one shown here, titled The Austrian Army of Italy, 18th of October 1805. The Austrian army was the result of some level of reform after 1800s, but it ended up meeting a French army which had been totally reorganised to meet Napoleon's rather advanced vision, and was as a result a state-of-the-art. The Austrians were always going to have an issue at a strategic or even operational level when faced with this kind of army. The individual formations, battalions, regiments, etc., were more than adequate, although some sources indicated the changes to the infantry battalion, which Mack implemented just before the war, was done so quickly the infantry lacked any training in how to operate with this new structure. This could be a reason why the Austrians seemed to perform so poorly, even when they outnumbered the French. And so this completes episode 17 of my battles video series, in this case covering the Austrian army during the early period of the War of the Third Coalition. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.